Welcome to Aging Insight with your host, John Ross and Lisa Schollmeyer. This program is made possible by
Welcome to Aging Insight. I'm your host, John Ross, here with my co-host, Lisa Schollmeyer, and we are elder law attorneys right here in the Texarkana region. And what we do as elder law attorneys is we try to address people's health, housing, financial, and legal needs as they get older. You know, we know that as people get older, they get concerned about, you know, what happens if they have to go to a nursing home, or what happens if they just can't handle their own affairs, and how are they going to afford the cost of their care. And we know that whatever your desires are when it comes to those things, we know you can accomplish your goals, but the only way to do it, there's only one way to do it, and that is with knowledge. You've got to be armed to the teeth with knowledge of how to navigate through this maze, because there's so much to it that if you're not, you're gonna get lost. You know, it's like being dropped in the middle of a big city with no map.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a map, you kind of can get around. You may still stumble occasionally, but at least you'll have a general idea of where you're headed. But if you're just dropped in the middle of nowhere with no information at all, you'll never find your way. And so that's what this program is all about, is getting you that information.
That's right. So, you know, and today we have a topic that I probably get many questions on. There's a lot of controversy about it. And the topic has to do with advance directives, or also known as living wills. And, you know, this topic was in the news really 2-3 years ago, particularly when the Medicare amendments came in and the Obamacare plans came in, because, you know, John, it appears that Medicare is considering paying doctors to have a consult with you to determine what your wishes are at the end of your life.
Well, you know, and one of the things that I've always told clients is when it comes to end-of-life medical care, you know, whether you want to be kept on respirators and feeding tubes and the different types of life support, I am not in any way, shape, or form qualified to answer those medical questions. I'm qualified to draft the document that says what you want or don't want, but I'm not qualified to explain those things. That's the job of a doctor. And so oftentimes I would tell people, you know, have this conversation with your doctor, find out what you want and what you don't want. Yeah. And I see that there's a lot of benefit in having that conversation with the doctor, and the federal government thought that there was a lot of benefit in people having that conversation, and so they thought, well, maybe we ought to let doctors bill Medicare for having that consultation. But it became a little political.
That's right, because I don't think the intention of the whole situation was very well communicated, and that, you know, one of the things that came out was, well, you know, this is just a situation where a doctor is going to get paid to essentially strong arm and, you know, our aging and weaker population into declining additional medical care, so that way we save some money. And you know, some of this came out to, you know, is this a more like a death panel type conversation? And so that the payment for these conversations to doctors has really been put on the back burner at this point.
Yeah, now there are some health insurance, private health insurance companies that do reimburse for this, but right now traditional Medicare does not. But you know, let's kind of back up and talk about, you know, because what they're trying to do with all of this is get people to have a conversation about a particular point in life.
Right. And you know, the situation is right now that, you know, most individuals, the vast majority of people do not have any expression of their wishes for what type of medical care they want in the event of a accident or illness that is, essentially going to lead to their death, there's nothing in place. They're silent. And so a lot of this push is to, at least get people talking about it and, people considering what their wishes are. So that's really the point.
Yeah, and so what we're talking about here is this living will. The name living will actually comes from a 1960s era article written by a law student in a law journal. He was talking about how modern medicine has gotten so good that people can now be kept alive even though they no longer have any brain function. And he said, unfortunately, we have wills that say what people want after they die, but we don't have a will that says what they want while they're still alive. And he kind of coined the term in this article, what we need is a living will, a will for while you're still alive that says what you would want when you can't speak for yourself. And so what we're talking about is a document that says, if you are going to die, you have a terminal, irreversible condition that is only going to that the only way your life is going to be prolonged is with artificial means. Now, artificial means, Lisa, that's pretty broad.
Yeah, it really is these days.
I mean, how many times has somebody told you, I just pull the plug if I get into that spot?
Yeah, no, and the response is, which plug?
Yeah,
there's a lot going on in there.
And when people think about life support, a lot of times they think about things like respirators, breathing machines. They think about feeding tubes or what are called PEC tubes. But they don't think about other things like what about, say, antibiotics?
Right. A lot of folks, if they are aging or in a disease process, they're very susceptible to infections that most healthy people don't get. The infection itself is not the disease process that we think is ultimately may take your life. So if you get that infection, there are certain heavy-duty antibiotics that can take care of it, but yet in that circumstance, that antibiotic itself may be essentially a life-prolonging treatment.
Right. So imagine imagine yourself in the very last stages of Alzheimer's disease. You're no longer mobile. You're bedridden, bedbound. You can no longer speak. You don't know what day it is. You have very little function. You can still breathe on your own. You can still eat if somebody spoons food into your mouth, and you get pneumonia. Well, that now it's going to take antibiotics to treat that, and that in that case is life support. So would you want to cure the pneumonia if all it did was bring you back to the very last stages of Alzheimer's? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But these are the kind of decisions that you need to be discussing with a doctor and then ultimately getting in writing with this living will. Now, there's a lot more to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to keep talking about it and talk about some of the details as far as all of this and some of the myths and rumors and where people get confused. So stick around, we'll be right back.
With my dad, it was in a hospital setting. And in his situation, he fell into renal failure. He also helped us make the decision to be on hospice. I have to admit, it took a huge weight off our shoulders for him to be willing. That offered us a lot of comfort, along with the hospice company itself, but it gave us closure, and it helped us through the entire process.
SEMA Hospice, comfort and care when it matters most.
The Oaks Independent are apartments for seniors who love secure, peace of mind, and consistency in their lives. Included in the price are cable, utilities, meals, weekly housekeeping, daily monitoring, and a medical alert device. All apartments wheelchair accessible, freestanding homes in a great part of town. Live in style, comfort, and accessibility. Live independent. Find us online or call today to schedule a tour. The Oaks Independent.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana. And there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioners still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer. I'm here with John Ross, and we are elder law attorneys. And we're here on Aging Insight to hopefully answer some questions that you have or maybe didn't even know you had. But today we're talking about, it's actually kind of a complicated area. We're talking about advance directives, sometimes known as living wills or directives to physicians. And these are typically documents where you have put in writing what your wishes are with regard to life-sustaining treatment in the event that you are in a terminal condition or perhaps in a vegetative state. But there's really a lot of confusion about what these documents are and what they are not. So John, would you like to?
So this is one of the problems, and I'll just give you an example. I'll have a client come in and I'll say, well, basically everybody needs a living will in place. We're all going to die. We know that. I hadn't had a client yet that's been able to beat that one. And knowing that that moment right before the end of our life may come with some issues. Maybe we have brain death before our body. So knowing what, being able to express what I would want in those last moments is very important. And so I'll tell people, I say, well, look, basically everybody needs a living will so that they can express what kind of treatment they want or don't want. And a lot of times the immediate response I get back is, oh, I'm not going to sign one of those, because if I sign one of those and I have a heart attack, they're just going to let me die.
Right.
But what they're doing is they're mistaking the living will with something else.
Yes, they're mistaking that with something called a DNR order. So a DNR order is a do not resuscitate order. And the difference is a DNR is actually a medical order as opposed to the living will, which is a legal document. And a DNR is a document that you sign in collaboration with your physician. Because it is a medical order, a DNR actually does have to be signed off on by a physician. And as opposed to a living will, which is just a document that you could execute at any time during your life, at 18, at 40, at 80, that just says if you become in a terminal condition, what type of life support or life-sustaining treatment you want and don't want. So they are actually very different documents. The way I often explain it is a living will is a document that says, what do you want on those last few steps of this journey we call life? You're walking up to the edge of the cliff, and if the cliff is the end of your life, then the living will covers what kind of treatment you want on those last steps on that journey, while a DNR, or a do not resuscitate, is an order that talks about, if you're going over that cliff, do you want somebody trying to pull you back onto solid ground? And so there's kind of a difference in those.
Yeah, typically we'll see DNRs in place for people who have terminal illnesses, or people who are at the end of their life, and essentially they are ready to leave this world. And they don't want to be brought back if they have a heart attack. or something like that, they don't want CPR because they don't want to be brought back to whatever their other illness is, and then just die from that illness 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
But everybody ought to have that living will. The problem is, the terminology gets kind of confusing.
It really does.
And so, I certainly understand when I have a client who comes in and says, John, I don't want to sign that living will because if I sign it, they're not going to give me CPR if I have a heart attack. Well, for that person, I'm able to explain the difference between the two. But now, take the situation where I am talking to a group of ER physicians at one of the hospitals, and we're talking about living wills and DNRs, and one of the doctors says, well, I had a patient come in one day and they had a living will in place and they had a heart attack, and I told the family they've got a living will in place, so I'm not doing CPR, and the family is telling me that I need to do CPR, so who do I listen to? Do I follow the living will or do I follow the family? Well, this is what the doctor is asking me, but did you catch it? He was asking the wrong question. This person has a living will in place, not a DNR. So sometimes even the doctors don't know the difference between these two. Don't just assume your medical providers know the legal difference between these. Because these terms get thrown around, they get confusing. So it's one thing to express your wishes on paper, but you also need to express it with your mouth as best you can.
Well, that's right. So, these days as we get older, we all have to go in for various tests that can be, less pleasant. So for instance, if you're over the age of 50 and you're going in for a colonoscopy, a lot of times the person who's doing the admission paperwork as you're going in for your test that day, they've got their iPad or whatever out and they're asking you, do you have a living will? Well, frankly, that question is a little concerning to me if I'm just going in for a test. I don't want, if I have a panic attack while I'm undergoing a test and that causes a heart attack, I don't want that medical provider to throw their hands back and say, oh, she's got a living will, so we're not going to do anything. So this is where, John, you were saying, make sure and clarify with your mouth and verbally, you would tell that nurse or that intake person, why, yes, I do have a living will, but I'm here for a test today. So if anything happens today, I want to be a full code.
Yeah, and that phrase, full code, that's a hospital phrase, but that means that they're supposed to do everything they can to save you, which that's what is supposed to happen anyway.
Right.
And even though you have a living will in place, you're still supposed to be a full code. They're still supposed to do everything they can to save you. But just in case that person doesn't know the legal difference between a living will and a DNR, if it's a nurse or a doctor, they will know the difference between a code or a no code.
Right.
And so if you say, oh, I'm a full code, then they're going to know, okay, do everything you can to save this person. Yeah. So a lot of times it's just a little bit of knowing the lingo. And of course, there's other situations where you may not be able to speak for yourself and all kinds of other things. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one more break and we're going to keep talking about some of the little nuances here that maybe you can learn from. So stick around. We'll be right back.
All our moments should be cherished. SEMA Hospice provides comfort care when you need it most with compassion, dignity, and respect. Along with Jordan Health Services, SEMA Hospice provides compassionate continuity of care. SEMA Hospice, comfort and care when it matters most.
As things get older, they require more care. This car and I have seen a lot of miles together, but because I take care of her, she runs just like she did in 1955. That's why I chose the Wadley Senior Clinic with an individualized care plan designed just for me and a convenient location off Jefferson Avenue. They have everything to keep me running like new. It's not about the miles, it's about the journey. Let the Wadley Senior Clinic keep you happy, healthy, and cruising down the road of life.
Hi there. I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana. And there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioner still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
From our first moments to our final days, life's journey should be remembered free of burden and worry. Families should be cherished. SEMA Hospice provides comfort care, dignity, and respect. Learn more about SEMA Hospice at SEMAHospice.com. SEMA Hospice, comfort and care when it matters most.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm John Ross here with Lisa Scholmeyer, and today we're talking about advanced directives, specifically about living wills and the importance of the living will and how you get the information about what to put in that living will, but also about, right before the break, we talked about kind of the difference between a living will and a do not resuscitate order, or a DNR. DNR is very selective for certain people. Living wills appropriate for basically everybody.
Well, that's right. John, and we were talking about the difference, and I know some of our examples may lead people to think, "Ooh, I don't want to do a living will," but here we're sharing information, so we're educating you. But for a healthy adult person who's not facing an immediate terminal illness, you still want to have that living will in place, because you never know when that accident or medical crisis is going to come on, which suddenly changes your whole situation, and now maybe you are on the road in a terminal condition or a vegetative condition, and you would want your life not to be prolonged unnecessarily. So every healthy adult should have a living will. You just want to make sure that your medical providers and all that they're appreciating the difference between a living will and a do not resuscitate.
That's right, and that it says what you want it to say, and it needs to be specific to you. And while I can't necessarily guide somebody on the different types of medical care that they might want or might not want, but there is a legal element to this, because these things are covered under laws. They're created by laws. And so, for example, if you have a living will, a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I already have one of those." And I say, "Okay, great. Do you mind if I take a look at it?" And what they hand me is a medical power of attorney. Mm-hmm. It's a document that says, here's who I want to make my medical decisions, but it doesn't give that person any direction.
Right.
So a medical power of attorney is not a living will, and a living will is not a medical power of attorney.
Yeah.
Those are two different things. But a question for you. If there's a conflict between what your living will says and what your medical power of attorney wants, which one of those would you want to be followed? If you have your wishes lined out on a piece of paper, would you want those wishes followed, even over the objection of your loved one that you entrusted with making your medical care? Or would you rather that loved one who you've entrusted with making your medical care be able to override what you've said? And depending on your personal situation, these can be the kind of things that you need to figure out and learn about, and then ultimately put in writing.
Well, and of course, when you do a living will and you've also selected an agent to make medical decisions for you, if you cannot communicate them yourselves, a lot of times having that living will in place, is a comfort to that agent that you've selected, because presumably you've had at least a discussion or two with that agent about these situations. And when that agent is faced with some of those decisions, if you've already expressed your wishes in writing for some of your end-of-life choices, then your agent can have some confidence that they're doing what you want, as opposed to bearing the weight of that decision all on their own shoulders.
Yeah, I can assure you there is a huge difference, a vast difference between a child who is following their parents' instructions versus a child who is making a guess as to what they think mom or dad would have wanted. The end result is the same oftentimes. You know, the end result may be to discontinue that life support and ultimately allow that person to pass. But the emotional result from that, which can last a long, long time, can be vastly different between those two. So you definitely want to, even if you're not really concerned about yourself, and you might be one of these people that says, you know what, I don't care what they do with me. Plug me in, unplug me, don't care whatsoever, none of my concern. But you know, presumably there's going to be somebody standing next to your bed that does care. And so even if you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for them. You know, and doesn't have to just be medical stuff. You know, if there's other things that you want to impart at this point, if there's other things like if you want certain religious rites or things like that to be administered during this process, all of that sort of thing can be included in that living will. So it doesn't just have to be all boring and medically stuff.
Well, and you know, so the other thing about living wills is if you have one, or if you found a form somewhere, or you know, you've been presented one at a medical facility, read it and see what it says. Don't just assume that it says what you think it says. So that's kind of an important point.
Yeah, it is. And of course, you can always get that kind of answer from an elder law attorney. Or you could even maybe call into our radio show, which is live every Saturday at noon on 107.1. Or you can just keep watching Aging Insight for more information in the future. But until then, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Aging Insight program with John Ross and Lisa Scholmeyer. This program is made possible by